Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Now the Intel Arc A750 here is a mid-range desktop graphics card that launched in October 2022 as part of Intel's first generation Alchemist discrete GPU lineup. The card features 28 Xe cores and 8GB of GDDR6 VRAM. It was engineered to compete with mainstream staples like Nvidia's RTX 3060, aiming to provide excellent 1080p and entry-level 1440p performance at a wallet-friendly price point. The card's legacy is defined by a dramatic redemption regarding its software. At launch, the A750 and A770 suffered from severe driver issues, particularly when it came to playing older DirectX 9 and DX11 games. This is something we tested back in the day and partially resolved by using DXVK, a Vulkan wrapper that helped improve performance in specific titles. The strong resizable bar recommendation needed to guarantee the best performance from the ARC series also potentially alienated users with older systems. Rebar is still a must in my opinion with these cards, but nearly half a decade later and it's likely that more gamers are using systems that support this. The relentless rollout of driver updates over the years following the A series launch has drastically improved stability and in some cases doubled frame rates in specific games. I remember buying one of these, this same limited edition actually, and experiencing the performance of some of my favourite titles getting better and better on an almost monthly basis. But how's it holding up today with newer titles? Are there still issues? Let's get into the games. To start with then we have 007 First Light at 1080p. Now to get anywhere near 60 frames per second we need the lowest settings and FSR quality. There is no Intel XeSS option here, at least at the time of this upload. We're seeing 53 frames per second on average with a 1% low of 42 and a 0.1% low of 39. Performance isn't very good here at all considering we need to drop down to these visual settings, and I'm not sure if it's an ARC optimization issue or it just runs like this on hardware of this caliber. I'm leaning more towards an optimization thing, but it is still playable in my opinion, though of course it doesn't look its best. Nor is 60 FPS achievable with even more aggressive FSR presets than this. For ARC Raiders at 1080p with the medium preset and TSR, we were seeing 76 frames per second, so 60 plus FPS is easily achievable here, and we don't have to use the lowest settings to do that. Now I've stuck with 1080p throughout this video because I believe that is the ideal resolution for one of these cards in 2026, especially as we get into the more demanding titles a little later on. But so far, well, it's a mixed bag. Two titles, one far more playable than the other, but Arc Raiders is running really nicely and pretty consistently as well. For Battlefield 6, we were once again able to make use of the medium preset with TAA for 86 frames per second overall. This average was taken from 3 games across 3 different maps, all conquest games as well, so a lot of players, a lot of things going on screen. 86 frames per second with a 1% low of 66 and a 0.1% low of 62, so it was actually really consistent as well, no massive dips and drops. Crimson Desert was a bit of a disaster. Now I believe this launched without Intel Arc support. If you had an Arc graphics card you couldn't even start this game, I think, when it came out. I never tested it, I didn't have an ARC card at the time, but now it will run. That said, it is a pretty horrible experience, at least on the A series card here. With the low preset and FSR 3.1 set to balanced, we're seeing 51 FPS, but the percentile lows were terrible. There were frequent freezes and stutters. Now this game does have XeSS as well. Since it added support for Intel cards, we have XeSS. But it doesn't perform any better. In fact, it was worse. You'd think XeSS would be better on an Intel card, but with this game, no, it was just as bad. In fact, the average was a little lower. Now you may be able to pick it up on screen, but every so often there were moments where the VRAM usage, according to MSI Afterburn here, shot up above 8GB, and we simply don't have that amount, and this caused some serious in-game stutters. This was the same no matter the settings that we chose or the FSR preset that we chose. The average was fine, but I'm going to have to say it's not really playable considering the percentile problems. For GTA 5 Enhanced, well, we can make use of the very high RT preset and the game looks fantastic here. Not only that, but we're still seeing at least 60 frames per second as well. Pretty much most of the time, 65 FPS was the average. The 1% low was 57 and the 0.1% low was 54. So in the cases where you may see drops below 60 FPS, the game is going to remain pretty consistent and feel really smooth to play. It also looks great. Who would have thought a game that's this old now would still look good? But thanks to many updates over the years and this newer enhanced version, it's still looking pretty. Resident Evil Requiem is another game that did not run so well at 1080p with the low preset and the normal lighting option. With FSR 3.1.5 balanced, we saw 43 frames per second with a 1% low of 25 and a 0.1% low of 11. Now, it didn't really matter whether or not we chose the low or the high preset here. The frame rate was still sitting between 35 and 45 most of the time. So this tells me that the ARC card may perhaps be a problem here, either that or the drivers, but I couldn't get this to run anywhere near 60 frames per second with any of the visual presets here, and FSR didn't help all that much. The difference between balanced and quality was also minimal, so it's still playable to an extent. We're still seeing at least 40 FPS, which feels okay, but trying to get near a 60 was more of a challenge. Not to mention the occasional frame dips and drops too. Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, one of my all-time favourites, now runs very nicely with the high preset at 1080p and SMAA2TX. Now we are encroaching on that 8GB VRAM limit here, so you may want to consider medium. I think the high preset was responsible for that slightly low 0.1% low of 48, but overall we saw 84, a 1% low of 71. So it was fairly decent, but as I said, that VRAM may start to cause problems, especially at the higher in-game presets here. This could potentially be alleviated by turning a couple of things, perhaps textures mainly, down to medium instead. But overall, I had a pretty decent experience over the half an hour I was playing this game. Forza Horizon 6 actually mentions an ARC card as the minimum requirements. I think it's the A380, which is like the weakest ARC card. It's a 6GB card. So on the A750, I didn't have any doubts that it would run pretty well, at least with 60 frames per second, and with the high preset and TAA we were getting 90 FPS overall, so a pretty good experience even as we drive through Tokyo City here, one of the most demanding areas in the game. The 1% low was 75 and the 0.1% low was 64, so fairly smooth overall. Indiana Jones and the Great Circle with 1080p medium now and TAA will give us 72 FPS. The 1% low was 55 and the 0.1% low was 19. Now this was caused by the fact that the game likes to save every so often. Like when you enter a new area, you'll get a little saving icon, and at that point the game stuttered, so hence the pretty low 0.1% low, but overall it felt pretty decent to play. That said, we are still seeing reports of over 8GB of VRAM according to the overlay here, but of course the card does not have that available. We got a warning when trying to use the high preset, so I do think it's best to stick to medium here, and this is going to give us a plus 60 frames per second average anyway, even at native resolution. We'll finalise with Cyberpunk. Now, I think the best way to play is the high preset with medium crowds. I chose the medium crowds for the sake of our i5-12400F, a 6-core 12-thread chip. We saw 80 FPS overall with a 1% low of 56 and a 0.1% low of 50, so fairly consistent here, and the game looks good at high. With the medium crowds, Night City is going to feel a little emptier, but if you have a more entry-level CPU, then this may be the better choice, hence why I've stuck with that here. The high preset will default to the medium crowd density option by default. Now, of course, we can also enable ray tracing with the A750, and with the RT Ultra preset with XeSS 2.0 balanced, we still saw 60 frames per second plus. Well, that's being quite generous. It was 61, so slightly over that target, but I was surprised by this result. So with a combination of RT Ultra and XeSS 2.0, well, the gameplay was pretty consistent and Cyberpunk looked better for it once I turned off all the motion blur and chromatic aberration stuff, of course, as a personal preference. To take this one step further, we also have access to frame generation, and if you do have an A750 and want to enable frame gen in Cyberpunk, then we're going to get an average of 98 frame gen frames per second with a 1% low of 36 and a 0.1% low of 30. Because we're starting off with about 60 FPS in the first place, frame generation doesn't feel too bad at all, and it's certainly worth a try on one of these older A-series Alchemist cards. But that just about does it for today. Now, with the arrival of the Battlemage B-Series cards, the B580 in late 2024 and the B570 in early 2025, we finally got better out-of-the-box stability and extra VRAM from ARC cards. Even so, I feel the first-gen Alchemist GPUs, like the A750 here, are still worth considering if the price is right, as there are some excellent bargains on the used market. That said, you may find that they aren't completely devoid of potential driver issues with the latest games, as Crimson Desert and Resident Evil Requiem showed today. Now, just remember as well that pairing it with a resizable bar compatible system remains an absolute must to get the most out of one of these, and if you want a safer bet, as it were, consider a 12GB RTX 3060 from Nvidia instead, as that offers extra VRAM and potentially better out-of-the-box driver compatibility with newly released titles. But let me know your thoughts down below. Thank you for watching, and hopefully I'll see all of you in the next one.